Shwmai a croeso cynnes, and welcome to the What's Your Story podcast. I'm James Owen, a Welsh filmmaker and storyteller, and I'm passionate about sharing stories. This podcast is all about business owners sharing their journey, and we'll be speaking with directors, entrepreneurs and creatives from all across Wales to learn from their experiences. We believe everyone has a story to tell. What's your story? Shwmai, and welcome to the next episode of What's Your Story. I'm really excited to welcome another guest from Cardiff. Well, I don't know if you're from Cardiff. Well, no, you're from the Valleys originally.
From the Valleys originally, James.
From the Valleys. He's not a miner, but from a mining background. And I'm really excited to unpack a bit of a conversation today with an entrepreneur business coach. That is Laurence Winmill. Thank you for coming on.
Brilliant to be here, James. Thanks for inviting me.
Is it the first time you've been in Llanelli?
Good God, no. As I said to you when we chatted earlier, I've had businesses in Llanelli a long time ago, publishing business, and there is a family history in Llanelli.
And I've since heard that we might have crossed paths in the rugby world because you've been to Furness.
Oh, well, there's another story because as I said, I'm a rugby coach as well in years gone by, and Furness Rugby Club was one of those clubs that we visited, and I am sure 100% that you were on the field one of those days when I was coaching South Gower on the opposing side.
Without me even realising. Did you have a warm welcome at Furness Rugby Club?
Not at all.
I'll have a word. I'll have a word with the committee. Laurence, it's great to have you on, and for those who are listening and watching the podcast, could you summarise who you are and what you get up to in a day-to-day in just a couple of sentences?
Yeah, of course. Well, these days, James, it's been a long and colourful life, and these days I'm a business coach. Previously, I've been an entrepreneur, creating businesses involved in various different businesses. Media and communications is my sort of core subject. But over the last few years, I've been passing on all of the lessons of life, and believe you me, there have been many.
You've learned a few.
I learned a few to up-and-coming entrepreneurs and try to help and guide them basically with some advice, some good business advice in terms of how they can grow, scale, and a successful exit of their business. And that's quite rewarding because if you can give back and tell people about the lessons you've learned and see them basically avoiding some of the mistakes that you might have made and going on to do great things, it's really rewarding when you can see that they take it to that final stage and exit and see the money in the bank.
I think it's quite refreshing on things like this. And part of me wanting to start this is to really get to know people's stories. And, you know, any good story isn't all just about going up in a linear fashion. There's always challenges and trials. And, you know, you've had a fair share of those, but you've shown a lot of resilience. I want to unpack that today. So it's not all rosy. And I've been through there myself, you know, but it's about how we bounce back and, you know, how we learn to still get up in the mornings to do what we absolutely love, what we're passionate about. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of lessons we can learn from that. And I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear some of those insights you've had in your business journey. So talk me through your sort of upbringing. You're from the Valleys, your family were in the mining community. What was it like growing up for you in the Valleys?
So I grew up in the Rhymney Valley in a little village called Brythdir, which is just outside Bargoed, Taff mining community. So the pits were very much alive when I was a kid growing up. We didn't have much money. My dad, he was a tradesman. So he was a coal miner, but basically he found it difficult working underground. So he retrained and became a carpenter. Still never had much money, worked hard. He was always keen to do better. With very little resources, he was very entrepreneurial. So he'd convinced my mother basically to put the house on the line, and they bought the local pub in the village, which was a mining community, and that changed his life. It changed my life. It changed my perspective on life. And at that time, we were just on the cusp. There was politically everything was changing in Wales. We were on the cusp. You know, we went through the 70s when the lights went out. There were power cuts, all sorts of things. Margaret Thatcher came into government. We had the Falklands War. And in 1984, we had the miners' strike. And that, if you like, sort of, I was in my early 20s at that stage. And then I could see people who had worked hard right throughout their lives, who were on the verge of losing everything as the mines closed. And that entrepreneurial spirit, if you like, you see it now at Tata Steelworks in Portal, but people have to try and find a way. And I was always looking to my dad, who was a bit of a rock in my life, and he was very clever. He was very entrepreneurial. He readjusted. He almost saw this come in before it arrived in terms of the closure with the pits. And through his sort of entrepreneurial flair, he'd taken the gambles and gone into hospitality. And from there, he did other things. He got into property and all sorts of other stuff. But he took gambles. That's the thing. And I used to look at him, and he had a massive influence on my life. And I always saw my mother was very cautious, battling with my dad, who was a bit of a risk taker. And for right or for wrong, what came out of that for me was, I didn't understand entrepreneur at the time, but he was high risk, high gain. Now that doesn't always work, but for him at that time it did. And it changed the way that I thought about life. I thought that if I'm going to do anything with my life, then I'm going to have to do things differently, and I'm going to have to follow him and take risks. So the risk taking began at a very early age.
So you learned to take risks thanks to your dad.
Yes.
He was a good role model to you and your family. And that kick-started and sparked a series of business ideas in you then, which you went on to go and do. And
yes,
so tell me about, what was the first moment you had, your first business then?
First real business was, I was working at the time. I'd managed to get a great, well, I say great job. It turned into a great career. So I was working at the Western Mill and Echo in Cardiff. And it was a brilliant career, really. And we'll talk more about that later. But it was during those early years of the Western Mill that I decided to do some moonlighting, if you like. And I got involved in a couple of projects. Number one, it was unregulated at the time. So I found myself to earn some extra income. I started selling some investments. People would remember the brand. It was called Cornhill, and I did through a broker. And I became very good at that. And as a secondary income, it proved to me that, again, being entrepreneurial, without affecting the day job, in my spare time I was doing this and earning some extra income. And through that extra income, I managed to save some money. And while still remaining at the Western Mill, videos at the time, before digital, were very popular. And people used to go and rent videos from their video shop. And I had an idea that rather than going to the video shop, that I could create some mobile videos where we'd take the videos to people's homes. I did some research, found a franchise operator, bought a franchise. We weren't married at the time. My girlfriend, who later became my wife, she was very hostile to the idea. I thought it was a ridiculous idea, but anyway, I did it anyway. So took on this franchise, and within less than a year, we'd grown that business from one vehicle on the road to 5 vehicles operating within a designated geographical franchised area. And clearly I wasn't working it directly. I was employing people to do that. And that was my first sort of real business opportunity. It gave me an insight in terms of how business works. And as you quite rightly said, it's not, you see it through rose-tinted spectacles. There was some really, really brilliant highs, and there was some challenging lows as well. But that was my first sort of taste of business.
Your first risk?
Your first risk, yeah.
Your first risk?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So you had this sort of, through your research, a successful franchise model that you wanted to tap into. And I'm trying to think, that seems alien to me, thinking about taking videos.
Well, it was alien because there was the video corner shop. There was no downloading. There was no streaming. There was none of these digital services. Again, in the valleys where I was still living at that time, it was a lot of council estates up in those valley areas. And they were our core customers in terms of demographic. There were people there who were on very low incomes. Don't forget, I already told you that the mines were closing. There were difficult times. People had not much money, quite frankly, and delivering a video to their house, particularly on the weekend period, was their form of entertainment. You know, they a couple of cans from the off license or whatever, and a few videos, and that was the weekend's entertainment.
Was it like the ice cream van you would just
yes, it was. But again, even in those early days, you talk about branding. We were big on brand even at those early days. So the actual color schemes, the brand guidelines, the vans were kitted up very professional. The people had uniform. They were trained to operate in a specific way. I'm not saying they always behaved the right way, but when I was around, they certainly did, and that's for sure. And it did cut through because it looked like a proper business. It was a proper business, and it gave us a USP, basically.
Like a lot of business owners in that position, you were working in a full-time job.
Correct.
You're doing a bit of a side hustle.
Yeah.
You have some success. And what was the sort of next stage in your sort of business journey from there?
Well, okay. The next stage was I made some money from that and invested that in some property. Still working with the newspapers, which was the Thompson Group, and that's where I really started to learn about business. I talk about career. I had a great career in newspapers, starting off as a sales representative working in the advertising departments, and then Thompson at the time were renowned for their training. So if you had talent and they saw that talent, they'd invest in you. And I went through a rigorous training program. So I moved from a junior salesperson into senior salesperson, into junior management, into middle management. I became a trainer within the business. So I ended up training their field salespeople, their telesalespeople, and very quickly moved into the senior management team and became a part then of their management portfolio in terms of at a commercial level, and taking on responsibilities and helping the titles basically perform to their best, looking at what we call now P&L, profit and loss. And it was during the latter days of Thompson's that I came across a mentor. And again, this person had a profound effect on my career. It was a guy called Richard Scudamore. Now, Richard, famous name, now retired, big newspaper man, based in London, responsible for running the Thompson Empire, which was an empire at the time. And he, when he exited newspapers, ended up working as the chief executive of the Football Premier League. So he's the guy who steered the Premier League that we know today into that sort of elite status as the world's best football league by a country mile. And during his time in London, he came to me to talk about risk. He saw something in me. I was working in a management position in Cardiff. He called me, asked me if I'd meet him in Bristol. I drove across to Bristol, met him, and he spoke to me about a job. He said, I'm going to put this to you. He said, because you seem the type of character he said, well, I think this is a great job fit. You come across as somebody who's prepared to take risks. So I wasn't quite sure which way this was going. He said, I have a job for you. The title was Wales on Sunday. The title at the time was flagging. Wasn't doing very well from a commercial point of view. From an editorial point of view, it was struggling. It didn't really know what its audience was. So it was going through a lot of research and redevelopment. There were a lot of questions out there commercially as to whether this title was going to survive. Sunday publishing in newspapers at the time was quite unique. It was being trialed. The Scotsman was one of those early sort of examples of a successful Sunday product. And then you had in Ireland, you had the Belfast Telegraph, which had their own version of Sunday newspapers as well. But in Wales, a few years earlier, they'd introduced Wales on Sunday, started off as a broadsheet, tried to mirror what they were doing in Scotland, completely different approach because they got the demographics in Wales are very different to what they are in Edinburgh, for example. And the title was struggling. So Richard came to me, he said, I'm going to put my cards on the table. There's question marks about whether we retain this title or not. The job that is available is the commercial responsibility of trying to make Wales on Sunday a successful product. He said, it's high risk, high gain. If you get it wrong, you'll probably lose your job. So he said, it's entirely up to you. You can stay and do what you're doing, which was a pretty safe job, or you can take on this opportunity. I didn't think twice about it. I said, I'll take the job. High risk, high gain. Within a year, well, first of all, within 6 months, the team I inherited had all, bar one, had all gone. So it was not me getting rid of. We talk about values, we're talking about cultures, we're talking about getting people to work with you as opposed to work against you. This was an exercise of taking people on a journey. And it was quite clear in those first 6 months that there was a lot of people there who didn't want to go on that journey. So within 6 months, we'd more or less lost the team. In the next 6 months, I'd rebuilt that team with people who I knew were capable and able to go on that journey, who subscribed to the values that we had in place and understood exactly what we were trying to do with this newspaper product. A few months further in, the line manager I was reporting to, who was the intermediate between myself and Richard, called me in to say that unless things changed pretty quickly, there's a chance that the project would close. I knew that all of the good stuff that we were doing was going to prove very successful. And I said to him, his name was Lynn, I said, Lynn, you need to bear with. We're doing a lot of great work behind the scenes. I have every confidence that this is going to come through. And I knew because there were deals that were being discussed, we were just waiting to drop. And within months, they started to just drop one at a time. And when they dropped, the money started to roll. And within less than another 6 months, the whole sort of concept, the confidence, the P&L of Wales on Sunday started to change. And from an ailing, flagging product that nobody really believed in, suddenly, within that Thompson stable, it became a massive success story.
Big success, and it's always easier to take a risk when
somebody else's money.
Somebody else's money.
Yes,
but I'm sure you learned a lot from that stint. And you're in the publishing world, and you were thinking about opportunities where you could, because it's probably in you, it's in your family, it's in your blood, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Right? So you were quite excited at an opportunity of running your own business, I'm sure. And did it then develop into the publishing company?
Well, not at that stage, but it developed into the next big job, because when you get things right, then obviously it's a bit like creating a brand, isn't it? People are aware of your profile. If people want to be associated with people's success, and a job came my way. So one of our competitors at the time was United News and Media. They owned, for example, some of the national products they owned at the time was the Daily Express in London. And in Newport, they owned the South Wales Argus and a couple of other titles, Barry and District News, Penarth Times, etc. So a job came knocking from them, which paid a lot more money, and it was an invitation to go and work with United News and Media down in Newport. I was caught in two minds, because I really enjoyed what I'd done at Wales on Sunday and with Thompson's. But I believed that it was the right thing to do if I was going to move to the next level in publishing. And it was the right move. So I had 5 years with United News and Media. During those 5 years, we went through, I think we were bought on 3 separate occasions. So it was acquisition, merger. I had a big job. So I saw people being made redundant. I always knew that there, but for the grace of God, go I. But I ended up basically as the senior commercial guy in Wales, responsible for, I think it was £10 million budget, 107 people working directly under me through various managers, etc. And a responsibility of ad revenue really from Pembrokeshire down in west to Barry and Penarth in the east, and then the hub of activity in and around Newport area with the South Wales Argus. And we did some good stuff. I learned a lot of lessons. I certainly entered the boardroom at that stage and learned a lot about how publishing really works, how ruthless it is in terms of the decision-making, in terms of being sat there on a weekly basis around the boardroom table with some really senior people, editors, managing directors, finance directors, discussing the ins and outs of why newspaper titles are making money or not making money, seeing heads roll. I've seen how ruthless it was. It taught me an awful lot about running a business. Quite frankly, 5 years into this project, I was pretty tired. I'd been in the industry for nigh on 20 odd years. I was still ambitious to go and do my own thing. And I remember in a conversation with one of the senior guys there, a finance director, and I said, listen, if we're going to go through another acquisition, if anybody's going to acquire us, we're going to go through this again. I said I'd be pretty happy basically to, if it's available, to take a redundancy. Anyway, cut long story short, I didn't expect it was going to come as quickly as it did, but I went on a holiday, came back, and when I came back from a holiday, this was about 6 months after that conversation, he said, you know that conversation we had? He said, well, the time has arrived.
Wow. just come back from holiday.
So it was quite unexpected, and I was given the handshake and the brown envelope, and there was a compromise agreement in there, which I took, which was a financial settlement. And that was my time in newspapers at that stage, done and dusted. I took a bit of a confidence hit on that, quite frankly, because even though I'd suggested it, I didn't anticipate the timing of it. And when it happened, I thought, well, what the hell am I going to do now? So I went traveling to sort my head out, just to take a time out from the industry. And when I came back, my wife said to me, well, what are you going to do? I don't know. But I didn't really want to go back into newspapers at that time. And a job I saw advertised was for a sales manager's role in a pharmaceutical business and medical supplies, which was something alien to me, completely out of my comfort zone. Applied for the job, got the job, which I didn't expect to get. I found myself working for, again, another big personality who made a massive impression on my life. So I told you about Richard Scudamore. This was a guy called Vince Kerr. Now, Vince, he's passed, unfortunately, now, but he was on a mission. He was the managing director of a business. He had an equity stake in that business, and they wanted to grow that business significantly over a few years and prepare it ready for a sale. He gave me the job as sales manager. Within 3 months of me taking that job, I was being headhunted by another newspaper publisher in Manchester. And it was a big job. And I really wanted to do the job. And I said to Vince, I'm not calling for anything here other than being straight with you. I've been offered a big publishing job, and I'm just settling into this job. But I think I'm going to have to leave to take this publishing job because it... And he said to me, what will it take to keep you? And I said, but it's not about money or anything like that. He said, what will it take? I said, well, it would take something pretty special in terms of understanding a project that you might want to sort of involve me in that could make a big difference and give me a big challenge. He said, well, what if I told you we're going to try and double the size of the business in the next few years? And what if I asked you if you'd help us basically to do that? Right, okay, and how we're going to do that? He said, well, I'd share the plan with you. And how much would it cost you? How much would you want, rather? I said, well, I haven't thought about it. He said, well, go away, speak to your wife tonight, come back to me and let me know. So when I spoke to my wife, I said, they want to keep me. I don't know what they're prepared to offer, but they want to go on this project. They want me to get involved in this project to help grow this business ready for some potential sale further down the line. So she said, well, go back and ask them for X, Y, Z, this, that, and the other. So I went in the following day and he said, did you have a chat with her? I said, yes. He said, so what do you want? I said, well, I need a 10K pay rise. He didn't blink. I want a brand new BMW. Didn't even blink. And I want an equity stake in the business. And I want a directorship within the business. He said, that's fine. So within 24 hours, he showed complete confidence in me. He said, so I had a 10K pay rise, a brand new BMW on order, an equity stake in the business, and a directorship. But the return of his investment was massive demands on my services. But in 2 years, we went on a roller coaster. I learned so much from the guy. He was one of the most ruthless people that I've ever worked for in my life. He didn't understand the meaning of political correctness. He didn't understand the word empathy, but he was very focused on what he wanted to do. He was an autocrat. Not everybody could work with Vince, but I thought he was a brilliant executive in his own right. And within those 2 years, we did some fantastic things. At the end of the 2 years, I say 2 years, I'd had enough 2 years in. He was a hard taskmaster to work with. And I resigned my position. But during that time, we'd set some targets to grow from 20 odd million to 40 odd million. We were well on the way as when I was leaving. And he asked me to stay on. He said, well, if you're going to leave, would you stay on in some sort of capacity? I said, well, funny enough, the reason why I want to leave is because I want to set up my own business. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to set up my own training business. All of the stuff that I've learned over the years, I want to go out there and I want to start teaching people basically about how to run a business plan, the essence of sales, all about the sales process, whether it's opening up sales, building great presentations, overcoming objections, closing deals, understanding a CRM, putting yourself in front of. He said, you sure want to do this? I said, yes. He said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll help you. We'll give you our training contract the next few years. So for a 2-year further period, I managed their training contract for a few years and helped them enormously on the way to their future sale. Business was eventually sold in 2000 and did a management buyout in 2007 for 7 million. Vince was still involved then. And in 2014, the whole business was sold again, I think it's DSC or DCC in Ireland for 48 million pounds. So it was a pleasure to work on that project. But just to show you how fragile life is, Vince came out of that a very wealthy guy, but within a year he was dead. He'd gone off on his motorcycle to visit his property in Greece. He had a massive heart attack while he was out there. He died, leaving behind a wife and a young family. So for all of the effort and everything he'd put into that, he never really saw the fruits of his labor. Humbling experience.
And that's to see that you've had a significant part to play in that journey, and great to exit the business. But it's sad to hear about Vincent. You're right. He didn't have to experience the fruits of that labor, and we all work hard to earn a living, right? And ultimately, we want to spend some of that money to enjoy our hard work. But it's sad to hear that for Vince. And gosh, that's quite the story, Laurence. You've worked in the pharmaceutical industry now for a couple of years.
It was an eye opener. So all of this time, you talk about entrepreneurship, this, that, and the other. Entrepreneurship is about having a passion for doing something. It's not just necessarily doing it with your own sort of capital investment, although we'll come on to that shortly. It's also, if you're given the opportunity in a large organization where you can demonstrate your flair, your passion, your entrepreneurial skills. Wells and Son is a great example. It's going nowhere, but using your own sort of initiative, using your own gut feeling, understanding markets and what customers. It's all about entrepreneurial flair and skills and working with people to make the most of the opportunity. I learned that there under the sort of mentorship of Richard. And when I went into medical supplies and pharmaceuticals, I knew nothing about that industry. But with the backing of a brilliant managing director, we did some fantastic stuff and built some great teams in Leeds, in Oxford, down in Kent and in Wales, and put together proper business with real structure, great people to take that business to a successful exit.
Brilliant. So a nice little story, and that segues into your sort of next business journey, one of many businesses. So you've had that stint in the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. Where did you then set up camp next?
So it was when I left Williams that I thought, I really am. I know I tinkered with businesses previously and did stuff in my spare time, but I really felt now was the time to do my own thing. So this is where my entrepreneurial spirit, if you like, really came into fruition. I decided that I was going to set up a publishing business. I had good pedigree. I understood exactly how publishing worked. I understood how newspapers and magazines worked. I'd moved out to Swansea. I understood in Swansea at the time, the publisher was Northcliffe Publishing, huge organization. So back in the day, you'd have United News and Media, you'd have Northcliffe, you'd have Thompson's. In West Wales, it was Northcliffe controlled the footprint down here. So it was the Evening Post in Swansea. You had the Carmarthen Journal down in Carmarthen, Llanelli Star here in Llanelli. Those were their prime sort of cash cows, if you like, that generated the big money. And I thought, having moved to Swansea, that I would become a disruptor in the marketplace, and I would put something in there that would start to strip out some of the big commercial ad revenues that they were generating. And I discussed this with a few people, and everybody told me that it wouldn't work. So I did it anyway.
As you do.
As you do. And I think that's the thing with an entrepreneur. Whether your business is similar, you have a passion, you feel confident in your own ability to do something, you're prepared to risk your own capital, and don't underestimate risk, and don't underestimate either the emotional risk that it puts and the pressure it puts on your family when you do this. But I decided to do this. And my idea was that we were going to create a series of lifestyle magazines within the Northcliffe footprint area. Really annoy them, agitate them, and persuade them gently to potentially acquire these magazines when they get to a certain stage. Interesting that on the day that I was finished the first title and before we published it, I invited the managing director of Northcliffe in Swansea for lunch in the Braz in Swansea. And he knew of me, he knew what I was doing. And I sat him down.
That's bold.
Yeah, we had a conversation. He came for lunch and I sat him down and I said, look, there's lots of rumors going around, but I want to be upfront with you. This is what I'm doing. He said, well, we know what you're doing because we've been listening and watching you. And I said, so before I create any more chaos in the marketplace, do you want to buy it? He said, well, why would we want to buy it? You haven't even printed a magazine yet. I said, well, I'm asking you at this early stage if you want to buy it before I go and cause chaos. No, he said, but we watch it very carefully. Anyway, the titles we're talking about is Swansea Life. So back in 2000, I think it was 2004, 2005, I created Swansea Life, put out the first magazine. Didn't really make much money in that first magazine, but it was immediately a disruptor. So within the space of a year, we'd gone from producing one magazine to quarterly magazines to then a magazine on a bi-monthly basis. And by the time we got to year 2, we were producing them every month. While we were producing Swansea Life magazine, which was a lifestyle magazine, I then put the pressure on and basically I started to recruit people who, again, shared my values, going back to the training that I'd received and the way that I built up teams in Wales on Sunday and in United News and Media, recruited people in who I thought could do the job. We launched the lifestyle magazine, Swansea Life. Then we launched Swansea Business Life. We had a big bells and whistles launch in Morgan's Hotel in Swansea. I picked Morgan's Hotel because it was right next to the Evening Post. So I wanted them to be fully aware of what I was doing. And very soon after that, we created titles in Llanelli called Llanelli Life, which is in the Llanelli Stars footprint area. We put another title into Carmarthen called Carmarthenshire Living, which is down into the Carmarthen Journal area.
Does that still go in today? Living?
No, none of them are going. They were in the digital space now, James. But so all of a sudden, this Northcliffe footprint area in West Wales, you suddenly had lifestyle and business publications popping up that were a thorn in their side.
These newspapers weren't doing these.
They weren't doing them. So within 2 years, we were taking £1 million out of their revenue streams. It's a lot of money going back to this. We're going back to pre-financial crash. So 2006, 2007, taking to close to £1 million out of their revenue streams, which was a lot of money. So we were targeting the sectors for automotive, property, recruitment, and display advertising. And we were becoming a right pain in their backside. Coming up to 2008, nobody saw this coming. I certainly didn't. You can do as much business planning as you want to. We talk about things that happen, external forces. I've already alluded to a few. When I was a young lad, there was the miners' strike. That was huge. That changed everything in terms of local economies, how businesses can fold overnight as a result, and people lose their jobs. In 2008, we had the biggest financial crash that we've seen since the Great Depression. In fact, and here's a statistic for you, the actual rate of growth that we had pre-financial crash, if that hadn't happened, the UK economy today would be £300 billion bigger than it is now without that crash. 6% was wiped off GDP in the UK. It affected everybody, including my own business. I can put this out there because it's true. Swansea Life magazine, at its peak, was generating in one single title per month, £30,000 a month. We would carry pre-booked ad revenue in a title. I knew 2 months before a title was published how much we were moving into that title. So in a single title, we would have at least 50 to 60% of pre-booked ad revenue. I can remember going into, I think it was January 2008. I was looking ahead to March 2008, and we went from a pre-book scenario of 15 to 16K into less than £5,000. And that was the first signs of what was to come in terms of the financial crash. That outside sort of shock, as we call it, global shocks, we've had a few since, haven't we? So we've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, we've had the cost of living crisis when Mr. Putin decided to invade Ukraine. We've had Liz Truss crashing the economy. These final shocks are things that we can't control. We couldn't control that financial crisis that happened. People like me couldn't. So every business was affected. So we were negotiating with Northcliffe pre-financial crash about a deal, as per our exit strategy, to acquire those titles. They did eventually acquire some of them, but on a completely different set of circumstances because the world had changed. And that wasn't really the ending that I wanted. But in terms of creating a fabulous product and a brilliant brand that stood the test of time, because it did, Swansea Life and Swansea Business Life survived that financial crash. And they've only phased themselves out over a period of time because of what's happened in the digital space, where all of a sudden print publishing is not as profitable as it once was at its peak. But that was a proper business and a proper journey.
That's a great little story about some successes, and I know there's a lot more within that sort of space of you advising businesses. You know, you've kind of acted as an internal sales and marketing director at times within some of these clients that you've worked with. I don't want to talk so much more about some of those other successes, just because I'm conscious of time, Laurence. Because you can talk for Wales for sure, mate. But I want to get into what was mine and Amy's favourite restaurant in South Wales. We absolutely loved it. I think we only got to go there a handful of times because of challenges. But Cakes and Ale, it was my absolute favourite place to go within South Wales. We loved going there. We loved the food, and for you, that was a huge risk to actually, you had an opportunity to invest in something maybe different. Your father and through your family had an experience in hospitality with a pub, so you thought you'd give it a go in Mumbles of all places. But I just want you to share just what are the sort of lessons you learned from Cakes and Ale.
Oh, okay. Well, Cakes and Ale was a huge lesson because I talk about shocks, and I've mentioned a few, but look, the Cakes and Ale concept came, as you quite rightly pointed out, through my association with hospitality in many years prior to obviously Cakes and Ale during my childhood. And I saw the success that my father had out of that. I didn't need to take the risk with Cakes and Ale. It was part of my sort of retirement planning, and that's how I saw it. I was living in Mumbles, family are here, children here, everything was in Mumbles, including my own parents who were obviously into their retirement, and they relocated here from the valleys. So my thought process was, I'd use my own capital. So I didn't want any equity partners or anything else. I was going to create a brand new brand that was all about people having fun. It was hospitality based. And I wanted this brand to operate from first thing in the morning till last thing at night. Mumbles is on the up. A lot of investment coming into Mumbles. So Oyster Wharf is a prime example of that. National brands suddenly coming into Mumbles, such as Bistro Pierre, Prezzo. gin and juice, which is not a global brand, but it's still a very successful brand in its own right. And then from a retail point of view, Marks and Spencer's coming into Mumbles, White Stuff coming into Mumbles, Fat Face are already there, Sea Salt, all of these nationals with an eclectic mix of retail and hospitality and entertainment. When you look at it through rose-tinted glasses, the sun always shines in Mumbles. No, it doesn't. But those are the glasses that I was looking at. So I thought it was a brilliant place to invest. I knew how hospitality worked and how difficult it was going to be, but I thought it was an investment worthwhile taking because it wasn't just about Mumbles. I wanted to create a brand. It was the way I would benchmark it would be something similar to lounges, where you've got these brilliant sort of concepts, whether it's across different towns in the right demographic area. And Cakes and Ale was going to be a bit like that. So the areas that we were looking at would have been, for example, Mumbles, right demographic profile for the products that we were selling. Also maybe Clifton, also maybe Pontcanna or Penarth. And then as the brand gathered momentum and was successful, it was obviously wiping its face in terms of profits, etc., building it up for some future potential sale. So it was a high-risk venture, but for me, it was a risk worth taking. So we acquired a building, which was an old coffee shop, bought it, closed it, refurbished it, did all the designs. You know better than most, James, every successful brand has to have a great story. The story behind Cakes and Ale was Shakespearean. It was taken from the 12th Night, Sir Toby Belch, and the quote was him referring to basically taking away the cakes and ale. And the scene of the story itself, it's a metaphor. That reference, cakes and ale in that play, refers to people having a great time, having fun, okay? Enjoying life when they shouldn't have been enjoying life. When the whole world's falling apart, people enjoying. So my idea for Cakes, so he went into Cakes and Ale, it was very sort of, it was a small venue, it was compact. There was no hiding from the Shakespearean theme throughout the cafe bar itself. But it was open from 8 in the morning and it was open until 2 o'clock in the morning, particularly on the weekends. You'd have great coffees, you'd have fantastic breakfasts, you'd have a brilliant array of cakes, you had fantastic menu, lunches, dinners, and then once 8 o'clock came and the food was off the menu and people had finished their food, we'd have music, entertainment, cocktails. It was brilliant. And it works fantastically well for a period of time. And I'll tell you why for a period of time. To build a brand from nothing takes guts. To build a brand from nothing basically takes imagination. It takes resource. We recruited a brilliant team of people. We trained those people. We invested heavily in those people, so we paid more than the living wage and the minimum wage, and it took off. Yes, we made mistakes in the early days, but within 6 months, we were doing remarkably well. And just as things were settling down, we launched the business in August 2019. We'd gone through the pain of the 6 months. We'd got our staff in place. We'd got our menus in place. We knew what we were doing. And then a pandemic arrived. And in March, I think it was 2020, when the world changed forever, Cakes and Ale changed forever. Because all of a sudden overnight, not just Cakes and Ale, but every business in the land was locked down. And what that did, that lockdown, it didn't just close businesses down, it changed the way people behaved. Because when they although it was difficult for businesses to survive because of the financial impact upon the business, and I invested then more and more money into it, which was, in hindsight, the wrong thing to do, but I did because I believed in the product, I believed in the brand, I wanted to keep the damn thing going. And when we were able to unlock and reopen, the world had changed. So social distancing was an issue. People were worried about coming into confined environments. People were wary. They wanted to spend more time outdoors where it was less likely that they could catch COVID. So there's so many things that we had to do to reinvent. So we used digital, for example, to build apps so people could order online. We introduced a delivery service. We worked with the council to acquire the road outside and build an outside space just so we were still able to trade. But we couldn't get enough people into the building. So all of the people that used to flock and congregate into a tight environment where the atmosphere was brilliant, those days were gone. We had screens inside, so with only 30 covers inside, it was impossible to make money with the overheads associated with it. And I was fighting against an incoming tide that was just too powerful, basically, to overcome. And I knew in my head that this business model was not going to work any longer. And it was
quite tough to
quite depressing to it. And I didn't want to concede defeat to it. The answer to it was, what else do we do? We'd set up the outdoor spaces. We'd introduced digital technology. We couldn't get the people through the doors. People never came after 11 o'clock at night any longer, so we couldn't sell cocktails. They'd migrate down onto the Oyster Wharf and they could sit outside in outdoor spaces, etc. People with bigger spaces, and they were reluctant to come into a confined space. Takeaways did really, really well during lockdown. I, again, thought that maybe the way out of this was to take a further risk and invest in a takeaway outlet, which was a takeaway version of Cakes and Ale, but with a fish and chip sort of not disguise, but a fish and chip branding. We called that Fish Cakes and Ale. And if I'm honest with you, that was literally my final throw of the dice in terms of the financial investment to try and keep the whole thing running. And then something else changed. So whilst we were planning for that, we were still trying to work our way through it. In February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. And again, after everything else that had happened, that was the beginning of the cost of living crisis. Energy prices soared. Ingredients prices soared because a lot of the ingredients were sourced, again, oil, for example, from Ukraine, fish from the Barents Sea, which was controlled predominantly by Russian trawlers. So fish prices, we'd pay 250 quid, for example, for a tray of fish. We were suddenly paying nearly £1,000. Wow. Oil, £8 a box or whatever, suddenly up to £42. But the final nail in the coffin in terms of the business model was in terms of the energy costs. So we were paying in one of our venues £600 per month on a commercial contract, okay, in terms of energy costs. So give you an idea, September, £600 a month energy bill, October, £3,000. That is the surge in the energy costs as a result of what happened. So when you look at it, and you look at Cakes and Ale, which was a brilliant idea, and if it was an idea that was a bold idea, it was very innovative, but the model suddenly was redundant. It couldn't work. And COVID and the cost of living crisis completely made that model redundant. And the risk that I took in terms of the takeaway concept failed, and it failed dramatically because of what happened with the cost of living crisis.
Come December 2022, you're in the process of closing two businesses. Where were you at mentally and emotionally?
Listen, right, I'm here today. You talk about that 2022 was probably the worst year of my life. Mentally, so Cakes and Ale closed around March, April 2022. My father died in June 22 unexpectedly through COVID. By the time we got through to November 22, and I told you about the energy bill that had gone through the roof basically in October. By the time we got through to November, Fish Cakes and Ale was closing. So within 12 months, two business closures and my father passing, when I can remember being on a train with my son, or meeting him off a train in Cardiff because we were going to watch a rugby international. And I can remember meeting him that day, and it was probably my darkest hour, and I mean that. Because I genuinely didn't know what was going to happen next, if that makes any sense. By my own admission, right throughout my life, I've taken risks. I've had some successes. I've had some business failures. I've done well with certainly from a corporate point of view in terms of a career. And there's been trials and tribulations there as well. But it's life, isn't it? You know, every entrepreneur will tell you that there's failure associated with everybody. You know, there's bigger and better people who failed. You know, Thomas Edison, 3,000 times to create an electric light bulb. James Dyson, 5,000 attempts to create a vacuum cleaner that works. Then you look at Steve Jobs, you know, who loses his job, then comes back to Apple and creates the iPhone and everything else. Walt Disney, Henry Ford, the list goes on, bigger and better people than me. The thing that sticks with me, and when you say, where is your mental state of mind? I remember saying to myself, you have to remind yourself that as an entrepreneur, you have to have a go. You've got a passion, you've got a belief. There's something, I call it the fire in your belly, that drives you to do things. But you have to go through the failure and experience that failure to understand that success is just another step away. And you've got to keep believing that. So never give up is the mentality. And when I met my son on off that train that day, when you say what keeps you going, it's the resilience. It's the either put your head under the duvet and disappear and never be seen again, or pick yourself up, brush yourself down. Remind yourself of all the great things that you've done. Remind yourself about all the jobs that you've created for people, all of the wealth that you've invested into the local community when you've done these different ventures. And remind yourself of all of those good things, because that will get you through the bad times and prepare you mentally to go again. And the last 2 years have been really difficult, but it's just trying to focus on the good things to get you through the bad times. And just keep believing in you and yourself and what you do.
And sometimes, if you've got a very short support network or a narrow support network because of circumstances and family and things like that, sometimes, even if you've got the best person next to you trying to encourage you and coach you, sometimes it's only yourself that can get you out of that hole. So, you know, for me, resilience is what I'm hearing, and I've experienced that in my own challenges. To get me out of what I've been through. A lot of it is faith, and God has certainly helped me, and my faith has helped me through tremendous trials in my sort of business journey, let alone my personal life as well. But I think a lot of the time, sometimes it just takes a bit of something in you, a fire in your belly to just get you across the line.
100%. So you talk, you can read the theory book all day long. There's plenty of business entrepreneurs out there and plenty of business coaches out there who give you advice based on what they've read in a book or studied at university. What you don't get, when you've been through it, as you have, and I certainly have on lots of occasions, good and bad, you then get proper, authentic advice based on real life experiences. And that's what keeps me going, is knowing that you've been through these experiences, seen the highs, seen the lows, and what I now really enjoy is passing on that advice and those lessons to other entrepreneurs who just want to go and give it a go and try and fulfill their dreams. And you know what, James? That's the key to it. A lot of people don't do it because they're frightened of failing. You should never be afraid of failure. The only thing you should be wary about is allowing the fear of failure to stop you doing whatever it is you want to do. That would be a tragedy, because if you allowed that, you'd never know. So believe in yourself. Don't listen to the doubters and just get on and have a go. And shocks will happen. They're going to happen. You know, Donald Trump has just become the president of the US again, isn't he? Yeah. But talking about resilience and bounceability, my God, you know, he gets shot twice, doesn't he? He's been president and he's back again. He's a felon. He's waiting to be convicted. Look, whatever your politics, there's a guy with bounceability. I'm not comparing myself to him, and that's for sure. And we don't know what shocks he's going to bring, but shocks will happen. As an entrepreneur, just have a go. You know, things will happen, but believe in yourself. And if it makes you feel good and you're passionate about what you do and you think you can make a difference, then go and live your dream.
Good. I want to ask you one last question. I didn't brief you on this, so we'll see how this goes. It's a bit of a curveball.
All right,
this podcast is all about stories.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, personal stories as well as business stories. I've gotten here some fantastic insight into your career,
Yeah.
your personal life, and it's great to hear that. And I'd love to know, if you had an opportunity to hear somebody's story, that could be someone that's really influential in your life, someone that's been very inspirational, someone you wouldn't have had an opportunity to hear. Whose story would you love to hear, Laurence?
The first one, and you would have seen this at Cakes and Ale. It was no coincidence. When you were sat having dinner with your wife at Cakes and Ale that evening, on the wall behind you was a story of Muhammad Ali. There was a complete, so you probably can't remember, but various sort of photographs sketching his career. And his famous fights against Foreman and against Joe Frazier. And the reason I say that is because Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, what's driven that? The Olympic story, the throwing of the Olympic medal into the river, the fact that he would refuse to go and fight in Vietnam, as he said, Viet Cong have no enemy to him, they've done nothing to him. And his ability to basically mesmerize and command huge audiences. Wherever he went, he was the most recognized man on the planet. But what was driving that man, I'd love to have sat down, as Michael Parkinson did, and just share his story, the ins and outs of a brilliant man. And most recently, and he's in the news now, and again, I was touched by this week, is the story of Sir Chris Hoy. We're talking about the cyclist. I'm not a cyclist. I don't understand cycling. I do know that he's a world champion 11 times over. I think he's 6 times Olympic champion. And you talk about, enjoying the moment and living your dream and doing your best despite what goes on around you. He's diagnosed with terminal cancer. During this diagnosis, his wife has been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. They got a young family. And he's talking about how lucky they are, lucky that they're still able to do things that they want to do and enjoy the moment. So to be able to sit down with him and hear and be able to look into the whites of his eyes, for him to tell his story, and to even now at this point in time where he knows that he's got very limited time left, what drives him on, what keeps him going.
What drives him in that sort of circumstance.
Absolutely.
I would absolutely love to hear that.
With a big smile on his face. And you only had to look at the BBC, or part of the BBC interview this week, to see that the guy genuinely is, he's inspiring so many people, but he's got a warm smile on his face, and he genuinely believes that he's a lucky man, even though that he's looking down the barrel of a gun in terms of a limited time on this planet.
I think if we had half of that in us, how much our lives would be so much
inspirational,
easier in the sense of facing challenges and adversity. Laurence, I really appreciate you coming down. I'm sure there's lots of people listening and watching who might have their own businesses, maybe at a sticking point, a bit like me in growth. It can be quite challenging to get to that next phase of business. You also speak at events as well. And I could sense the motivation. You want to go and fight. I love it. How can people reach out to you, and how can you help support those that are maybe listening?
Well, thank you for that. Very simple to get in touch with me. They can either find me on LinkedIn, Laurence Winmill, or if they look up laurencewinmill.com, you'll find me. And there are 4 services that you'll find at laurencewinmill.com. And they are, number 1, mentoring. So I give mentor advice to people who want it. I certainly work as a business coach, and I'm happy to coach people on all aspects of growing a business, dependent upon obviously what their needs. I'm happy to advise. And as you quite rightly say, I really thoroughly enjoy speaking at events and inspiring people and telling people about my story, basically, and how to overcome adversity, particularly from a business point of view, despite what the challenges are. Never, ever, ever give up. Always believe in your ability to do great things, and try and put smiles on people's faces. That's what I try and do, James.
Diolch, Laurence.
Diolch yn fawr i chi.
Da iawn.